What's up everybody, Mr. B here. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Illustrator app. Now this workspace is really nice. It's really clean and simplified and definitely tailored specifically for this touch interface and specifically for your iPad. So it's actually a really great way to start learning how to do some graphic design because it's a very simplified app and it's industry standard. So we're going to dive right in here. And instead of just going over all the tools, we're going to start with a basic layout, but then we're going to actually just start designing what you see here. So on the left hand side, you'll see a toolbar with some tools that should look familiar to you. You can select the tools, but then you can also long press to see the nested menus or double tap and those same options will pop up. On the right, you'll see your layers panel. With that selected, you can select and drag to reorder your layers, and you can also group them so I can have subgroups. And if you swipe right, you can rename your layers or you can trash those layers. Right below it is the properties panel. With your content selected, the options and properties will be slightly different, but you can very precisely move objects. You can rotate them, you can change the appearance, and you also have some blending modes and opacity modes. Now, with the contextual menus that pop up, you don't really need this as often as typical. Right below hand are some nice viewing options, so you can turn on and off snapping. I like to leave the default on, but the snap to grid you might want to put on, especially when you're doing some logo designs, and you might even want to place a grid so that way you can see how objects are aligned and so on. And you can change these properties as you like. Now the taskbar you see below here are essential tools for building vectors, like this shape builder tool, which we'll get into, and then also these pathfinder tools. The shape builder is awesome because it's a very intuitive way of combining shapes. The pathfinder actually shows you how shapes will interact before you actually do this, and it is a non-destructive edit, so you can come back in and modify that, which we'll get into. Now, instead of going over each individual tool, we're going to dive right in and kind of layer this information and start working on these designs that you see here. I have these organized into a layer group, and so I've just already titled it Logo Demo 1. So I'm going to hide this so it doesn't get distracting, and we're going to create a new layer. I'm going to go ahead and keep organized. This is a good idea as you get started. We're going to call this Logo, and I'm going to call it 2 since I already have 1. And we're going to go over to our toolbar to the left. These tools are fairly self-descriptive and it's pretty easy to figure out what they do. However, I'm going to go to the shapes to get this started, and I'm going to grab the triangle tool here. Now as I drag this triangle, before you get started, a couple quick tips. If you double tap with 2 fingers, it does an undo. If you double tap with 3 fingers, it redoes your command. So get in the habit of selecting the properties or the color before you actually draw your shape. I'm going to go ahead and keep it a fill, and I can change the color by changing the hue of the color and which color I actually choose. If I just want black or white, it's right here. And if I want to borrow a color from something that's already on my document, I can use the eyedropper tool and select that color. I'm going to just keep it black for now. And as I click, I'm going to drag. And if I want to scale this proportionally, this circle here that you can actually move around your screen is called your touch shortcut. So think of it like your command and control button on your keyboard. And if I click and hold, it scales proportionally. If I click and pull it to the rim, it's like your secondary touch button. So it's actually scaling from the center now. I just want to scale proportionally from the corner, and there it is. Now this contextual menu that pops up, it gives you a lot of great commands without going to the properties panel. So opacity, and if I want to go more opaque, I can just keep sliding, so that's pretty handy. And I can change the stroke. I can move it just by dragging that move tool. I can lock the layer and unlock it right in the window. And then I can reorder right here by dragging. And I can ungroup and regroup. I can also trash it. So I'm going to move this right to the center. And now I'm going to make some more triangles. This time I'm going to change the color so I can see the difference. We'll just go like a reddish color. Doesn't really matter at this point. And I'm going to drag this. And we're going to start to use the shape builder tool. But first, I'm going to draw a couple of shapes. Now if I want to duplicate the shape, I can just select this. It's been duplicated and I can drag it over. Let me undo that. And I can scale it when I use my touch shortcut and place it right to the right. I'm basically going to make some mountain peaks. We're going to be working on a design that looks like an A, but it's going to be inspired by a mountain range. So I'm going to try to replace the letter A with this little symbol of mountains. As I have my two shapes, I can now select both shapes, and I'm going to look at this shape builder tool or pathfinder tools. So with those two selected, it gives me this nice preview of these pathfinder options. So I can hit combine all, I can minus the front, since this little triangle is in front of the large one, it's going to subtract the overlap. I can intersect them, I can exclude overlap, or I could hit divide all. So you can see what these are doing. I'm going to hit combine all. So what that does is essentially makes one shape out of both. However, you can still see the overlap, but if I were to invert the colors to a stroke, it's only acting like one shape. So with the selection tool, I can still select individual shapes and modify it. With the direct selection tool, which is the arrow below, I can individually modify these points. So if I want to select the point, I just select the shape and then select the point, and I can drag and modify these corners. I can also drag this little dot below hand, and it adds a radius. I'm going to undo both of those. And I'm going to revert back to a fill color. Now I'm going to use the pen tool, and this tool can be a little tricky. I'm going to change it to a stroke. So this is fill, where it's filling the color, and this is the outline. And with the outline, I'm going to draw on this red to show basically like the snow or the shadows of a mountain. And I'm going to come down, and if you click once, it drops a point. If you click again, it adds another point and just connects them with a line. And so if you just click from point to point, it's just very straight lines. And then you want to enclose that path. So now that is a shape created with the pen tool. I'm going to do the same thing over here, but this time if I click and drag, it's going to create an arc and it give me these handles. If I touch the shortcut, it's going to lock those down so I can only modify one of those handles, and then I can always drag that point later to modify it. I'm going to undo because I just want straight lines for this one. And enclose that shape. Now after I have it drawn, I can always come back in here and modify these dots or these points. So if I want to pull this down, what I'm looking for is seeing if this is a consistent thickness. Now let's say I want both of these to be perfectly aligned across the bottom. I can select both of them using the selection tool, and holding this is like a shift button. And then I can use these align tools, and you can see how they're going to be aligned. Are they going to be aligned to the left, vertically center, to the right? I want horizontal bottoms to be aligned, so now they're in space aligned across the bottom. Now I'm going to select all my objects, and I'm going to use my shape builder to combine these. Now if I just use minus front, it's going to actually cut out the shapes from the shape behind it. So if I drag this over my black shape, you can see it's a window. This is how you want to build your vectors. You don't want to have a white shape on top of another shape. You want to actually cut out the shapes if it's supposed to be transparent. So I can drag these mountains up and place them here. I'm going to scale them down. I'm going to hold my touch shortcut and drag the corners so they scale proportionately. And center align it. You saw that purple line? That is because I have those snap options on, and it helps me align things center. I'm going to scale down just a little bit more. Now if I didn't have those aligned, what I can do is select all of these, go back to my align. I'm going to align them across the bottom, but then I'm also going to align them to the center. They must already be aligned. Now I'm going to cut out these from the black triangle. So I'm going to select everything, use my Pathfinder, and you can see what it's going to look like with the preview and the thumbnail. Minus front. Now to make it look a little bit more like an A, I'm going to use another shape. I'm going to grab the star, and since it's already filled black, I'm going to change the color so I can actually see what I'm doing. Just whatever color is fine. And I'm going to start dragging it out. I want it to stay proportional, so I'm going to hold the touch. If I drag, I have a couple other options. So I just want to touch once, constrain it, and now I can move it. Now let's just say it dropped behind. I didn't see it. If this would happen to you, you can select it and reorder it by selecting this and pushing that dark triangle back. Or you can just open your layer panel and drag this path above the group. So now I'm going to position it just the way I want. Select both. Pathfinder. This time, since I have a grouping, it's not exactly what I want when I hit minus front, but you can see exclude overlap is. So that little preview really comes in handy when you're not sure or when you're just being introduced to these tools. So now if I select everything, a good test to see if it's a true vector is just to switch the colors, but then also to invert it to an outline once it's selected. And if it looks something like that, you did it correctly. Now if this were my logo, the last thing I would want to do is think about any typography that I would want to add, which brings me to the type tool. So over here, there's two different clicks that you can do here. You can click once, and the text box will basically grow as you type and increase the scale of your font. Or if you're typing a paragraph, you can click and drag the text box, and it will be constrained inside that window. For something like this, I like to do the click once. I'm going to select the text and type out my word. Now this font doesn't look very good with this, so I have a couple font options that are given to me right here. I can increase my letter spacing. I can increase text size and decrease it just by dragging on the button. I can change line spacing if it was more than one line, and this move tool that I really like. So depending on which direction you start moving it, it basically can also lock in orientations. Now in my properties panel, it gives me more options like text. I'm going to find a text that looks good with this. And I'd rather do all capitals, so if I go back to my properties panel, there's an all caps button. It's way too large, so I'm going to decrease the size. I'm going to increase the character spacing. In my layers, I'm going to create a layer group, and I'm going to just call this Ascent for this logo. And an easy way to drag these, if I were just to select everything, and in the scissors tool, it allows me to cut and paste and copy. I'm going to cut everything. I'm going to select that accent layer, and now I'm going to go back to the scissors and hit paste. That easily moves everything into this layer. I like to use this method to help me with layer grouping. I'm going to drop that Ascent into Logo Demo 2 before I move on to the next design. I'm going to draw a circle. This time I'm going to do strokes. So now I'm going to use the circle tool again. I'm going to draw a circle, move it so it's roughly center. And now I want to show you this pattern tool. I'm going to make a pattern, a radial pattern, and you can see it makes these beautiful, perfectly symmetrical patterns, and you can increase the number that's being patterned and make some really interesting things. I want 6. And you can also easily pull out a certain number if you don't want everything there. So if you can see the use for this, it's a pretty powerful tool to create some really interesting geometry. Again, I want 6. And then dragging this white circle will actually change the diameter of the circle that you're patterning around. So it doesn't have to be exact. I'm just going to play to show you the shape builder tool. So with that done, when you select it, these are all combined shapes at this point. So over here in this object panel, you can hit expand, and it's going to break all these apart. They're still in a layer group, so what I want to do is say ungroup. So if you look under here, they're now individual ellipses. So now I'm going to delete every other ellipse, like so. And now I'm going to basically create 2 offset circles inside the bottom 2 by duplicating that circle, holding the touch shortcut, scaling this one down. I'm going to just move it up and over a little bit. And I could reflect this circle by mirroring it and changing where that mirror line is. However, I'm going to just duplicate here and then use the move tool to drag it across to show you those snapping lines work really well. Now what I want to do, I actually don't need this circle anymore. I'm going to use the shape builder tool. I need to first select my shapes. So I have 4 ellipses, and I'm going to use the shape builder tool to create an interesting combination of these shapes. So by just drawing a line through where you want them to overlap, it's going to combine these shapes. Just like that. Now to test to see if this worked the way I expect it to, you can flip the fill color. And you can see it's given you all of these paths, but really the compound path is what I want. So what I can do is cut this out. I'm going to delete layer 13, just drop another one in, and hit paste. So now those shapes have been merged, and I have a really interesting form here. So that's an easy way you could create some interesting logos, especially if your logos start with an O for this situation. So the shape builder tool can be a great tool for combining shapes when creating some interesting logos. So the last thing to do is add your typography and move it into place. If I want those to be perfectly aligned, you should never rely on just winging it. Go ahead and use these tools to your advantage. Center align. Now if I want them all to be aligned together, I can drag a box over all of them and hit center align again. Now you'll see osmosis is not actually center aligned. What's happening is the text itself is left aligned with the paragraph box. So if it doesn't look right, it probably isn't. So make sure it's center aligned. It's because I drug a text box out instead of just tapping once. So now when I center align everything, the last thing is to make sure they are in the correct layer group. So I'm just going to select everything to see where they are. I've created a layer called osmosis, and I'm going to cut these out of wherever they are because I don't think I put them in the right spot. I'm going to hit cut, select osmosis, can expand it and hit paste. Now I'm going to create a layer for the next one. I'm going to call this shark. I'm going to demonstrate the pen tool in a little bit more detail. I typically use the pen tool for creating organic shapes. So I'm going to first insert a photo where I can trace it with the pen tool. I'm going to reposition this and also scale it proportionally. Now I'm going to go ahead and lock this image so I don't move it. And I'm going to grab the pen. And I'm going to go ahead and switch it to an outline instead of a fill. So this is stroke, this is fill. And I'm going to change the color so it's very easy to see. I'll just go with like this magenta color here. And I'm going to start tracing the boundaries. Now if you click and then click again, it's just going to connect it with a straight line. These are organic edges. So what I want to do is click and hold in the direction I'm about to draw. So you can see these handles going in the direction I'm about to. And that way, when I click and drag again, I'm going to drag in the direction that the shape goes. And the line starts to bend the way I want it to. Now this is where it gets a little tricky. I want the curve to go like this along the fin, but if I bend the handle in the direction I want it to, it's not quite right. So what you can do is I'm going to shift back and forth between the direct selection and the pen tool. Because what the direct selection tool allows me to do is I can click those handles and just remove those. I can also modify the points if I need to, and I can also modify the curve by dragging the handle. So I'm going to go back and forth between direct selection and pen tool quite a bit. So as I start again, I'm going to select that point, and then I'm going to drag a point to get that curve. And then I'm going to add another point. And think of this like connect the dots. You want to put a point everywhere that the curve is going to change direction. So along the top of this shark nose, it's pretty much one curve. There's some irregularities along the way, but I'm going to simplify it because this is for a logo. So I'm going to click at near the nose and just arc it a little bit. Looks like I didn't get quite to the nose. And then right here as it curves around, I'm going to do another point. And obviously that's not quite right. So I'm going to come in and modify that handle before I get too far. And I'm just going to pull that handle back on this side. Touch the last point I drew. And keep going. Now you'll see that little nub. That's because this handle is kind of perpendicular. So I can keep moving. I'm going to draw around this shark. Now if you ever forget one of these gestures or points, you just hit the help button. You can say view gestures. And what's really helpful here is the view touch shortcuts because it's that move tool. You'll notice there's two for the pen, edit handles, and add to selection or selection points. So I can actually use this as I'm drawing with this pen tool to kind of do some of these tricks that I'm doing with the direct selection tool. The best way to figure out the pen is to experiment. It might be frustrating at first, but you'll start to develop some skills that are extremely useful, especially when you're drawing original shapes. Now that I have my shark completely outlined with the pen tool, I can select that outline and reverse the fill. And now I can change that color to whatever I want. I'm just going to go black for now. And I can hide that picture or completely get rid of it if I'm done with it. And now I have a vector that will scale infinitely, and I can also use it to combine with other shapes or use it to cut out shapes. The last thing I want to show you are where you can download vectors and combine with other shapes. So if I go to a site, I can search for free vectors. There's two sites that I like to use a lot, Vecteezy and freepik.com. And I've searched for airplanes. And it's a good idea to filter before you actually find one you like, because this is a website that offers free stuff, but they're also selling ones as well. So I'm going to search for vectors. I'm going to hit free license, and it'll start to filter at the top as an ad, so don't click that. But you can see free next to these. Certain file types that you'll see a lot of are EPS. iPads have a little bit of trouble with those, but you'll also find some with AI files. So you might not be able to use the first one you find, but there are some great resources here. If this is the one I want, thank you, Nori Achabawo. He is the creator. I'm going to hit free download, free license, and you can see download. It's going to download as a zip file. So if I hit my downloads feature, it'll take me to my files. And the zip file needs expanded. So here it is. I'm going to expand it, and airplanes is my file. I can come back to Illustrator, and I'm going to create a new layer. We'll call this one planes. I'm going to hit this little image on my tools, and you can insert more than just photos. You can go right to a camera. I want files in this case. Here are my planes, and you can see it gives me all of these. I'm going to drag it down here for now. And the problem with this is it is grouped. All right, so I'm going to have to break this apart a little bit. So here is my, whoops. So I'm going to have to break it apart a little bit. I'm going to go back to objects. I'm going to hit ungroup. I'm going to select it again, and I'm going to say release clipping mask. And now with my direct selection tool, I can select that background color and trash it. So now there are some other shapes in here I'm going to get rid of. But if I go back to my layers, remember I can see what's actually in this shape. So I'm not sure what that path is, but I'm going to delete it. I'm going to also delete that. And now you can see all these different planes inside this clip group file. So I want to use this top one to the left. I'm basically just going to hide the other ones for now, in case I pull this out of the clipping group. And now I can modify this however I want. So if I want to rotate it, I want to scale it, I want to use it to cut into other shapes, I can do that. If I want to create something that says like air or airplane, I can think about, okay, if I want to do something similar to the top one where I started with a triangle, grab my triangle tool, I'm in the correct layer. I'll just design here off the artboard, which is totally fine. And I could make it 45 degrees. If you hold the touch shortcut, it'll snap to every 45, I believe. And if I want this in front, remember, I can just drag the layer and pull it forward that way. So I can start to see how this will look. So right here at the tip of the tail is just touching the bottom of the triangle. Alright, so now I'm going to use that shape builder tool and cut out the shape of the plane. Now the problem is it didn't actually cut through the triangle. So what I can do though is I can just grab the eraser tool and cut the shape apart. As simple as that. Now I can select that little piece and delete it. And now I have this cool triangle shape with a plane inside. Now I'm going to put this on top of a circle. Now I'm going to cut this out again. And now you can see that's actually a window in space. Now I'm going to type out some text and pair it with some text that looks about right. Now before we're done here, I do want to show you something that you can do with some font types. With that font selected, it's still a typeface, so I can come in and change the font and the size. However, I can convert this text to a shape. So if I grab this little T tool on the right, I can say outline text. Now it's as if I drew this with the pen tool. I can still change the appearance, however I can't come into the properties and change it as a typeface anymore because it's a shape. But what that does mean is I can start to modify this. So with the direct selection tool, I can select individual letters. I can grab the individual points and start to grab these points and move them around. So if I want this A to be taller, I can do that. If I want this E to drop down below the R and the O, I could drag a box carefully over these 4 points. Drag this down. I'm going to hold the touch shortcut. Then I can drag these 2 points and pull it across. Now I can move my A down. And I can do the same thing for the rest of the letters and start to play with different alignments between the text itself and start to really customize this. And use this as my A. And you can see it's a little difficult for me to get that aligned. So what I'm going to do is just use that align feature. Now the reason it's doing that is because there's all these other shapes. It's actually aligning the bottom of that circle that was there to the bottom of that text. I don't want that. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to ungroup this and get rid of that circle completely. Now when I select it and use the align tool, we should be in business. Now, looking at this design, just be careful of how you modify text. Right now it looks like afro, so if you're going for arrow, this is definitely not successful. But if we are going for an airplane afro, maybe this is good. So hopefully these tools will become quite useful to you as you start your beginning stages of designing logos. And then you've got a nice overview of the Illustrator app. So have a lot of fun. Don't get frustrated. There's always that undo button, and can't wait to see what you make.